Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Thank you for joining today's webinar organized by the Microfinance Gateway in partnership with the Risk Management Initiative in Microfinance. This is the second webinar that we're hosting in a series of 4 webinars on risk management hosted in partnership with the Risk Management Initiative in Microfinance. My name is Valdete Berisha, and I manage the Microfinance Gateway. Before we begin, I wanted to go over a few logistical details for the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time. As you have probably noticed, this is an audio broadcast. So as such, attendees are able to use the chat box to submit questions or ask or interact with other participants. But unfortunately, we will not be able to allow audio microphones for attendees in order to preserve sound quality. As you can imagine, we expect a large number of attendees, so we would like to everyone to be able to hear. You can submit questions throughout the event. I actually encourage you to submit questions and not wait until the end, because it makes it easier for the moderator to collect them and ask them at the end. So the way to do that, you have to click on the chat. If you don't see the chat box already on the right-hand side, if you look up on the right-hand corner, you will see the chat tab. Click on that, and then you will see the box. You type in your question. Just make sure if it's a question, select all participants in the drop-down menu if it's not selected by default, because that way both the speakers and the moderator and everybody else will be able to see your question, so that we minimize repetition, and your question then for sure will get to the moderator. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that we do record all webinars, so this one is also being recorded. So just in case you have to step out, we will send you the recording usually within the 2 days after the webinar, so be in the lookout for that. We'll send you the recording and the presentation. So that's, I think, all I had to say. In case you don't see the presentation right now, it should, the first slide is already open, but we've received feedback sometimes that participants don't see the presentation. The way to enable the presentation is, if you look on the right and the left-hand corner at the top of your screen, you'll see 3 tabs. It will be Quick Start, Event Info, and then you will see a file name April 4. So if you click on that, that's where the presentation is. Hopefully that addresses all of the questions that you might have at this point, and I'm happy to turn over the mic to our moderator today, Saum Park. Saum?
Thank you, Valdete. And thank you, Microfinance Gateway, for hosting this webinar. Thanks to all of you joining us today. Our second webinar, as Valdete said, in the series of 4. This has been really exciting to see such a great turnout. I think our last webinar, we had almost about 200 participants, and I see today we have 72 and continuing to join. So there's clearly a huge interest in this discussion about risk management and financial inclusion. And today, I believe today I believe many of you joining us are consultants in the industry, or interested in hearing about an approach that is specific to consultants. I know we will need all of your active participation in moving this initiative forward, and I look forward to our discussion today. We won't get to hear from all of you during this very short webinar, but please do join the Gateway's LinkedIn group and RIM's technical working groups to continue this very important conversation. My name is Saum Park. I'm Principal Consultant with Magpie Venture, and we provide consulting and executive coaching services to microfinance institutions around the world. And I am again honored to be the moderator for this webinar. Our previous webinar, we opened up the series with the industry-wide challenges in managing risks in a comprehensive and integrated way as financial services providers, and perhaps the lack of a model of risk management that is appropriate to institutions that have both financial and social objectives. So then we were introduced to RIM, Risk Management Initiative, and its graduation model, which is a risk management framework designed specifically for financial inclusion institutions, with double bottom line that is also comprehensive and measurable and scalable, that allowed benchmarking for a network of banks like Access Holding, as we heard in the last webinar. Today, our topic is risk management assessment, standardizing an approach for consultants. And I would go so far to add standardizing risk management assessment and development approach for consultants. I think this is so important, as I myself as a consultant, as often we see financial service providers receive technical assistance from several different consulting firms on a major, very long-term project like developing risk management framework and systems. And yet consulting firms coming in and out apply sometimes different approaches. And it would be much more effective if we had a standardized approach, like having some kind of a sketch to risk management blueprint, if you will. Today, we get to roll up our sleeves and have a little more practical discussion on how consultants can apply this graduation model, what is the process involved, and what are the tools that are available. And we'll hear about the experience from a microfinance institution, as well as from our MGM, Risk Management Graduation Model, independent assessor. So I am excited to introduce you to our three speakers today. Our first speaker is Kevin Fryett, who is the director of RIM, Risk Management Initiative. He's been at the forefront of bringing this subject of risk management into the financial inclusion space, as you may very well know. He is the risk management subject matter expert for Axion's Africa Board Fellowship Program. Previously, he has served as the Director of Advisory Services with MSX Solutions, leading their education and capacity building in sub-Saharan Africa. He's also served as Microfinance Technical Advisor for World Relief, overseeing the global network of microfinance institutions, in addition to serving in CEIF's Financial Services Working Group and numerous microfinance institution boards in over some 20 countries. Our next speaker is Clive Nshipa. He's joining us as the CEO of Untu Microfinance in Zimbabwe. He is also a chartered accountant and a CFA charter holder. He trained with PricewaterhouseCoopers in both audit and corporate finance, and has worked in Southern Africa, the USA, and the UK. Clive attended the University of Oxford as a Bates Scholar and completed his MBA there. After Oxford, Clive worked for an emerging market private equity firm in London called Actis Capital, then founded Untu Microfinance in 2009 and has grown the business from a 3-man operation in one office to an 8-branch and 90-employee company. He's also a former chairman of Zimbabwe Association of Microfinance Institutions, ZAMFI. Our final speaker is Hans Hackenberg. Hans has worked for many years in the banking industry, I believe 28 years to be precise. He has set up and managed new risk departments globally. It's been about 6 years since he has made his transition to the microfinance sector, working as an independent consultant to provide training and consultancy in risk management, compliance, risk self-assessment, and strategy for MFIs, credit unions, cooperatives, and banks in various countries. He's also been active in committees and boards of various professional international bodies. For instance, he served for more than 10 years as chair of the audit committee of Oikocredit. As we'll hear later, Hans is also a member of RIM and has been active in technical working groups as well. So I will now be passing the microphone to Kevin, who will give us an overview of RIM's RMGM. Again, it stands for Risk Management Graduation Model Institution Assessment, the process for consultants to applying this model to financial service providers. And as Davide said, these slides and links to the resources, because we'll be seeing a lot of them, will be available to you after the webinar, so you don't need to be writing them all down. I do ask you to please pay attention and type in all your questions in the comment box throughout the presentation, and we'll look forward to a dynamic Q&A session. So I'll hand over to you, Kevin.
Great, thank you, Soan, and welcome everyone. Yeah, and as Soan has mentioned, today is really a day where we, I think most of us on the call or on the webinar are consultants or engaged in some sort of capacity building activities, and today is really the day that we're going to look at how do we turn this framework into something that we can use and use in a standardized way. What I do want to say is just to start out is someone mentioned this institution assessment. I'm going to get into that in a couple minutes here. What this is, just as a very kind of high-level introduction, is let's just say what this isn't. This is not a risk assessment methodology, just to be very clear. This is a risk management assessment. So we're not, what I'm going to describe to you is not necessarily assessing levels of risk in an institution. What we're focusing on is capacity building and assessing through a process that I'll describe in a bit, the risk management, the presence of risk management structures and kind of in the guise of building out a full risk management framework within the institution. So we're really focused on capacity building. This is not, one of the questions I get quite a bit is, how is this different than an institutional rating? Ratings focus on creditworthiness of an institution. This is focused on capacity building. So we want to get our minds into the capacity building stream as we kind of jump into this. One of the things, I think one of the questions that institutions often ask, and I think as consultants we also have to ask ourselves as well, is the question of how. How does an institution, number one, do they understand how to build out their risk management framework over time? And how do we as consultants and consulting firms coach them through that process? And this is really kind of what this process is designed to do. On the slides right now, you'll see this institution risk management improvement process. This is essentially kind of a process that an institution, any sort of institution, financial institution, would have to walk through to sort of improve their risk management, both by understanding the framework that they're going to adhere to, whether that's something that's internally developed or maybe through a network that they're associated with, all the way to sort of strategizing and planning out how they're going to develop their risk management function, and then wrapping it up with an evaluation of whether that worked or not. This is essentially the framework that our assessment process leads an institution through, and we'll get into that right now. So the question is then, what is this RMGM assessment? At its heart, I think, as Soan mentioned, this is an institution assessment, and as I just mentioned, really focusing on assessing not assessing risk, as I mentioned, but assessing the risk management capabilities of an institution. So at its heart, it's really a strategic process. I think when we think of assessments, we sort of, at least in my mind, this vision of understanding where people are at, which is partially true in this instance, but I think more importantly, our assessment process is a strategic process for institutions to really, in a proactive way, strengthen their risk management systems. I think what we see a lot of now in the industry is institutions who focus a lot on developing products and services that suit their clients, which is in and of itself a good thing. But the focus is on kind of these hot topics, whether it be new technology or what have you, and kind of giving the risk management kind of a back seat until crisis hits, and then obviously it gets everyone's attention. What we want to do is really flip the cards a bit to say, okay, we need to be doing these two things simultaneously, and this is what we've done in developing this assessment methodology, is really understanding where the business is going, and then working through a strategic process, which is this assessment process, bringing those two things together, bringing the business strategy together and bringing the risk management development strategy, if you would. So how does and trying to answer the question, how does our risk management function adapt over time? And I think what the graduation model allows us to do is to look into the future and understand what our function should look like, depending on where our strategy is headed. At the end of the day, the primary kind of, let's say, output of this process is what we call an institutional graduation path. And what this is really a strategic work plan that the institution can incorporate into its business plan and really rally around to say, okay, as my business is developing down the line over the next 3 to 5 years, this is what I need to start working on now, this is what I need to start working on 2 years from now, and this is what I need to be working on 3 to 5 years from now, really to get an understanding and a visibility on and clarity on where it needs to go in terms of its risk management function. So our process is, we've designed this in a very strategic way, starting with sort of the contracting party or the contracting process. And this is under the assumption that many times there's a contracting process with a TA facility or a funder of some sort, and if there isn't, then as a consultant you would become the contracting party. But we incorporated this this contracting and sort of pre on the ground assessment process into our methodology, because this is where a lot of these projects go sideways. A lot of capacity building is often done for the wrong reasons, maybe at the wrong time for the wrong motivations, and we work through that in our assessment methodology and discuss some of that stuff, because the last thing we want to do is waste money, and the last thing we want the industry to be doing is wasting money on projects that are not effective. What I want to focus on in the next few minutes is really kind of the 5 steps. It's an 8-step process. The 5 steps in the middle, which are focused on the assessor, which essentially is all of us as consultants, both from off-site preparation. How do we get ourselves ready to go on site with an institution? What do we need to know? What information do we need to have? All the way through to kind of wrapping up our visit with an institution. You'll notice at the bottom of that diagram is RIM, which is the initiative that I run. We are sort of on call to be engaged with assessors and play a dual role. One is sort of a help desk type of function where we can assist assessors while they're on the ground and when they're preparing to go on assignments, as well as then training assessors in this methodology and improving the methodology over time. So we'll discuss training a little bit later toward the end of the session, but we train assessors who are then kind of worked into our assessor database, which is a public directory for the industry to get in contact with consultants. So the resource that this methodology is wrapped into is our assessment toolkit, which essentially is a 3-part step-by-step guide which walks an assessor through the process. It focuses on like an explanation of each step of the process, why it's important, what practical tools are associated with that step in the process, what are the expected outcomes that you should have as an assessor as you are kind of working from one step to the next to ensure you get to the end result that you're looking for. This is a resource that's available to our members, and it's available on our website. I've given the web link there. You can also navigate on our homepage of our website, riminitiative.org, through the Solutions menu, and you can get to that resource that way. One of the tools I did want to highlight is what we call our Assessment Tool Plus, which if you've been on our website, you'll see a complimentary download of sort of a basic version of an assessment tool. This is a full assessment tool that allows an assessor to, this Assessment Tool Plus, I should mention, is a full version of the tool which allows an assessor to run the full-scale assessment process with an institution. And the way that it basically works is we'll work, like an assessor will work through with the institution and in conjunction with the contracting party what the goal tier of the institution is. And what that is essentially in 3 to 5 years from now, where do I want to be within RIM's graduation model framework? And there's a number of different things that feed into that discussion on what that goal tier is. And once that's been identified, that's what the assessor will assess against. And what this tool allows an assessor to do is then obviously assess the institution whether they adhere to or not certain guidelines in our graduation model. What it then does is then auto-populates all the gaps. So anything that's been scored as partially adheres or does not adhere to our framework, these get worked into sort of auto-populated through the push of a button into a section of the tool, which then allows the assessor to work through a strategic exercise with the board and senior management to develop the institutional graduation path or this strategic work plan, risk management work plan. This functionality in this tool, and I think if you were to talk to any one of our assessors, they'll tell you that this element of our tool saves hours of time, and I think we designed it primarily for that in order to really lower the cost of risk management assessment within an institution and add value to a consultant or a consulting firm's proposal to a potential funder or to an institution, et cetera. And that's really what we're aiming at doing with standardizing a lot of this is really providing value to consultants and consulting firms in a standardized way and giving them the tools and resources necessary to implement this. Just a few of the other resources I want to make mention of quickly here is that come as part of the 29 other resources, I guess 28 other resources, and for the total of 29 resources that are part of this toolkit. Document request forms, so basically a way to kind of facilitate document transfer with the institution, ensuring you get all the documents you need. Exercise templates, user guides, presentation templates, a final report template, so we don't have to sort of create a structure ourselves. And then our knowledge base, which we mentioned on webinar 1, and we're going to do it again. We're going to have a poll here. If you want access, 30-day access to our knowledge base, which essentially is an exhaustive resource that goes hand in hand with this assessment process, giving more detailed information about each guideline in our framework. Feel free to answer the poll, and I think Valdete is putting that up there now. If you answer yes to this poll, we'll get you signed up for that and get you access to that knowledge base. So in a wrap, that's kind of the resource on the table in terms of risk management assessments using our graduation model and the resources we have available. I'm happy to answer questions after the session is done if anyone has any more detailed questions related to what it can do and the value that it can provide you. Back to you, Soan.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I really do love that polling capability on this webinar platform. I hope many of you are signing up for this free trial. I've used the knowledge base myself many times, and I really like to call it more like an encyclopedia of risk management that really helps me during my work in the field. There are so many guidelines about, it's really hundreds of guidelines depending on the tier level that you're looking at, and sometimes I might not know what exactly the guideline means or why is it important, and this knowledge base really gives me such information. So thanks, Kevin. And our next speaker is Clive, who I actually had the pleasure to work with in Zimbabwe to implement this RMGM assessment, the institution assessment, and develop their risk management framework at Microfinance, where he is the CEO. And it's been over a year and a half, I believe, since we implemented RIM's RMGM assessment. So let's hear what's been going on at Untu. Clive.
Thanks so much, Saun. And maybe just to get started, as a microfinance institution, and as indeed a growing one, we certainly did identify strengthening our risk management processes and our internal controls as an area of focus, and it's really within this context that we looked to use this tool. So really for us, why risk management ranked very highly in terms of our priorities is really because of the need to actually control and manage our growth better, and the need to really introduce a high level of certainty in meeting both our financial and social goals as an institution. And lastly, we felt it very important to strengthen our risk management capacity in order to also build a lot of confidence with the investors and the prospective sort of debt funders, and also our regulator, and as far as our ability as an institution to manage risk. Okay, so why RIM risk management graduation model? For us, we were looking for a very robust benchmark that would achieve a number of things. First and foremost, we're looking for a benchmark that would take into account the age of the institution, in other words, the size, and also take into account the type of the institution. But also use it as a benchmark against best-in-class within our industry. So having identified RIM as such a tool or that achieved this particular aim, we set about to use RIM to kind of measure as a starting point the strength of our current risk management processes, with a view of obviously identifying areas of current weaknesses and really putting together a plan or roadmap to close these gaps. We found RIM as a model to be extremely useful in crafting a structured and clear plan, really to meet our risk management aspirations. And as such, we went through a process with Saun, as she's described, where first and foremost we worked with someone who was very, very familiar with the risk management graduation model. And Saun did come through to the institution, spent time with us, understood the institution, and understood what we were trying to achieve. Within the context of that, we first and foremost engaged our different teams across the institution, so our management teams, together with the board, to ensure that there was full buy-in of what we were trying to achieve. And over and above that, we really wanted to ensure that everyone really understood the process and the tool. Having done that, we undertook the assessment with the guidance of an independent assessor. Having used the tool to assess the institution, we were able to both measure the current capacity, risk management capacities within the institution, and we're able to also identify gaps that we felt needed addressing. And as an immediate output of that process, we're able to develop a work plan, which we then used to close these gaps. A key part of the solution for us was ensuring that we constituted what we felt was a very peculiar situation to our context as a growing institution. We constituted a management risk committee to first and foremost champion the process of carrying out the execution of the agreed plan, but also adding capacity where we hadn't really built a dedicated risk management department. So this really was a unique solution to this case. Where are we 18 months after the process? We believe with the aid of the tool, we've been able to achieve a great deal. We've certainly built very strongly on what we felt was a good base, but over and above that, we've just overly improved the risk culture within the institution. And this is incredibly important for an institution that is growing and an institution with pretty big ambitions. And in that context, out of the action plans that we had actually agreed to complete within the agreed period of time, we were able to execute on 75% of them. We did have the different line managers from the different functions who were part of this management risk committee. And over and above doing their day-to-day, they also became part of the process as a risk management committee to meet fairly frequently, which was quarterly, and oversee the process of actually executing on the targeted actions. We obviously would have wanted a higher level of achievement, but we felt satisfied with the work that we'd actually put in as an institution. The institution is now preparing to use the tool again to measure where we are and really get a sense of the level of progress that we've attained to date. Lastly, reflecting on the process of using the risk management graduation model assessment tool, we felt certainly that the tool was very robust, certainly a credible standard to use to assess one's risk management capacity. We felt it also articulated where we wanted to go by really comparing us to the different tiers within the microfinance and financial services sort of brackets. I mean, to that end, we used the assessment tool to also identify gaps that were currently in the institution, and we also used it very well in actually putting together a plan to subsequently close these gaps. We felt that the assessment tool allowed, certainly does have capacity and allows Ubuntu as an institution to progressively measure the progress that we've made with a view of understanding the existing gaps and also measuring the progress attained over a period of time. Lastly, what I would close by saying as a tool is certainly the tool was extremely useful. We thought it was very robust, very comprehensive, really built in the flexibility to consider the different lines of business of the institution and the growth of the institution, and very well articulated its aims and had enough guidance to really allow us to use it. So we quite enjoyed the exercise and felt that it was extremely fruitful, and we felt that the tool was very robust, and as such, we would really recommend it to other similar institutions.
Thanks so much, Clive. I hear a little bit of an echo. I hope everyone is able to hear me clearly. Thank you. And you know, it really reminded me while you're talking, Clive, that we are talking about standardizing approaches, and I'm curious to hear, perhaps we can visit this during Q&A session, if other consulting firms have come to Ubuntu since we kicked off the development of risk management framework with the RMGM model, and how having started with this has helped in what ways. I think that would be very interesting to hear from you, Clive. But we want to continue now to our next speaker, Hans, to hear the perspective of a financial services risk expert. As I mentioned during the introduction, he's been with the banking industry for many years, and in particular with the ING Bank, really from, I think its inception days as NMB Bank in the Netherlands, and throughout its mergers and acquisitions and transformations, as many banks do, to what we now know as ING, and some of us might know it as a full digital financial services provider as well. And he has transitioned into being a consultant. Now his company is Risk-Tensive Management. And Hans also teaches non-financial risk management at Boulder, I believe. And he has used, I see one of the questions about who's used this toolkit and the model already, and Hans is one of them. And he's used it with a Tier 2 institution in Cambodia. So it'd be great to hear from you, Hans. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Saun. Yes, as Saun already alluded to, my background is in commercial banking, but now being consultants mainly focusing on MFIs for more than 6 years now. And it's quite remarkable because I see a lot of similarities between banks and microfinance institutions, how weird it might sound. One of it is that what you see in the financial industry as a whole is most of the time quite a scattered approach in risk management. In banks, you have different departments for credit risk, for asset and liability management, for operational risk, maybe for compliance. And in MFIs, it's maybe not different departments, but that they focus mainly, for example, on only financial risk and maybe only on credit risk. And there is really a lack of awareness of other types of risk, and especially, let's say, the links between the various risk types. And that's one of the key messages I would like to give, is that the RIM model is really brings it all together. It is a comprehensive approach to the arena of risk management, and I think that's one of the big advantages of it. Secondly, it is a scoring model. It is scoring, let's say, the risk management capabilities, and it gives you room to see where you want to go. So what is your ambition level? What do you want to reach in the area of risk management? So why was I interested in this? Well, it is the first model, to my knowledge, to offer the integrated approach, like I just mentioned. It is measurable. It is measured not only financial risk, which is quite easy because you have the numbers, but you measure also the non-financial risk. And it focuses on, well, what's still to do. It is objective. It benchmarks against industry standards, and like already was mentioned, to experiences in best in class MFIs. It is also easy. It's easy to use. That's one, and it is easy to convey the message. So that's another advantage of it. And it is also not a one-off, but you can use it as ongoing monitoring. So you can, like Clive already mentioned, you can use it again and again and again to see where you are. Okay, the next slide shows what are the advantages for the risk expert. Maybe you can show this in the next slide. Advantages. Okay, I'll just continue. The advantage for the risk expert, well, basically, is that it shows all the risk-related topics. Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you able to move the slides forward because we're on the first slide?
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh,
there it is.
great.
Right.
Just wanted to make sure sometimes it gets stuck. Thanks.
Yep. So it focuses on all areas of risk management, and it includes also governance and strategy, which are basically the critical success factors for risk management, as you all might know. It is also a structured approach, so it is basically each and every chapter follows the same principles, policies, limits, management tools, and monitoring tools. So you see in all these chapters the same approach, which makes it easy to use. Further, like Kevin already mentioned, is that it has an extensive range of tools. In itself, it's an Excel tool, but additionally, it has sets of presentations, formats, background information, and in the Plus version also the graduation path. And that is a big plus for consultants and risk experts because it saves time. It prevents you to reinvent the wheel, of course. So it is user-friendly, not only for the risk expert or the consultant, but definitely also for management, because it's so, like I mentioned before, easy to understand. It's easy to convey the message because it shows all kinds of diagrams and it shows you exactly where you are, and also if you use it for monitoring the progress. So it's transparent, it's repeatable, it's objectives, it is easy to convey and easy to use. Well, then a note. Like I'm very clumsy when I have a hammer and nails. I cannot say I'm a carpenter. So what is important? It is a toolkit, and there are a range of resources, but they are still tools. You have to use them in a proper way. Everybody understands that when you talk about hammer and nails, but the same applies to this set of tools. You have to know how to use it. Second thing is that what is very important, and it guides you more or less in that direction already, is to be aware of what is called root causes and domino effects. One risk can be the cause of another risk. For example, if you don't have proper governance in an MFI, well, then probably you have other risks like not sound credit risk management, or you have reputation risk, etc. So that's very important to ask the question after the question. And that leads me to the next point, is you cannot expect from a model that it has everything. It guides you, it helps you, but of course you have to use your knowledge and your brains in order to ask the question after the question, to dig a little bit deeper. The last point I want to mention is that, like you all know, if you are in the field, there is a big difference between test of design and test of effectiveness. What do we mean by that? Test of design is, well, for example, you have a manual and it is there, it's up to date, etc., and it's complete, but nobody is using it. That means test of design is perfect and test of effectiveness is 0. Well, of course, the end result is 0, as we all know. So those are, well, that's basically what I wanted to tell in short. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans. And I think that last slide you showed us is a really great segue for the very first question that I have for Kevin. like Hans said, I like the analogy of the carpenter. Even great carpenters, when there's newly designed hammer and nails to use, might need some kind of training or manual to be able to adapt and use the new tool. And so I know Kevin mentioned something like there are 29 resources available on RIM's website already and continuing to develop. Kevin, could you perhaps guide us as to where you suggest we start as consultants and how can we access them?
Sure, thanks, Selena. And I saw some questions coming through the chat box as well, so I think this will kind of maybe hit on some of those questions as well. But just a few action steps for folks who are interested in getting involved in one way, shape, or form. As we mentioned earlier, and there was the poll that was given earlier to opt in to receive complimentary 30-day access to the knowledge base. If you were not able to respond to that poll, or maybe you joined late, you can also do this on our website and on our homepage, riminitiative.org. You'll see a box that looks like that 30-day trial box on the right. You can sign up there, and you'll have to use this code RIM2FREE30 in order to get your 30-day access to the knowledge base. What the knowledge base is, again, just I think Saun mentioned it, but I'll just reiterate it. It's an extensive resource and like an encyclopedia in many ways that is associated with this assessment process, giving additional clarity and guidance to each of the criteria or guidelines in our graduation model. That's one way. Another way is getting trained and being part of our assessor database. So consultants who want to be trained in this approach, we do have trainings, and I've put the links to one of the trainings in Luxembourg on the screen here. There's also others, and I would say keep your eyes open on our websites on the events through the events menu. There are other events and training events that are there as well, and that will show up in the coming months. But once you're trained in this approach, through the training, you'll be granted a complimentary 1-year individual membership, and you'll have the opportunity to opt into our database through getting trained as well. So people who are the independent assessors that are on our database are trained in this methodology. They do have access to the tools and resources to be able to implement, and they also have sort of an active membership with RIM if they're on that database. A few other things, there's other, like we have working groups as well, and I'll send out an email to folks after the webinar in the next day or so, which can give you a little bit of insight into those and how you can get involved into those as well. Just the other thing that I've put also, if you have any questions, maybe your questions weren't able to be addressed in the chat box, info@riminitiative.org. Feel free to send me a message there. And then also our website address there is at the bottom of the screen as well.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And that's really a great way to answer lots of questions that's coming in around how do we get involved with RIM for firms and consultants, where do we access these slides. I hope that the follow-up emails that will come after the webinar also answer some of those questions, and that you're able to directly address them with RIM afterwards. Kevin, could I add just one more thing on one of the questions that has come in is just what are some other ways that consultants and firms can get involved with RIM?
Yeah, no, thanks, Soan. I think first and foremost, membership. So what membership we have an individual membership for, let's say, independent consultants, targeted towards independent consultants. We also have an organizational membership, and the benefits of those and pricing and everything else around membership, application forms, all of that is on our website, and that will also be sent out via the email, and more information about that via the email that I'll send. As part of membership, you get access to our working groups, which are tackling kind of shared challenges in the industry, where we pool both practitioners and risk management experts together to come up with mutually agreed upon and useful solutions to different issues that are faced. The graduation model itself was designed through a working group structure where we pooled technical knowledge and know-how from around the world and developed this framework and ended up testing it in a number of different countries around the world in various shapes and sizes of institutions. So yeah, membership's one. Getting trained as an assessor is another, and being involved in our working groups, being involved in webinars like this, et cetera, in the future are different ways that you can be involved. I've also mentioned the assessor database and these sorts of things, so these are all different ways that people can get involved.
Excellent, thank you. The next question I have is, I'd like to open it up to all three speakers. Kevin, in the beginning, really made the distinction of this not being a risk assessment, but rather a risk management assessment and a really a strategic process. And the question of does this model evaluate all kind of risks faced by a microfinance institution? So if anybody wants to take this question.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in. This is Kevin here again. Just from the development perspective of the framework itself, because the assessment process uses the framework. So let's talk about the framework. The framework was developed as a comprehensive framework, and comprehensive from the variety of risks that are included within it, as well as the sort of a tier-based framework where it grows with the size and scope of an institution. That was in response to a challenge that we found in the industry, where the industry's grown up quite a bit in the last number of years, yet the risk management view, and I think Hans made mention to this, is getting past just looking at credit risk or just looking at maybe fraud within the credit process, but we have new types of funding that we are now receiving as institutions, and that brings a whole basket of asset liability management type of risks, FX, interest rate risk, liquidity for deposit-taking institutions. Yeah, it's a comprehensive set of risks. You can actually go on our website and navigate the graduation model through the graduation model menu, and you'll be able to see the types of risks, and there's general risk categories and then even sub-risks underneath those categories. So I'd encourage folks to go on there, navigate around, just familiarize yourself with what's there, and that might help out quite a bit.
All right, and I do want to go back to an itching question that I had earlier, really for Untu, as we're talking about standardizing approaches, and as Hans mentioned also, we are saying that using this model really would help us not having to reinvent the wheels. Clive, has Untu been working with additional external consultants, continuing to develop your risk management at your institution, and how has using the RMGM model, if you will, how would you describe whether it's helped or hasn't helped in some ways in terms of your project and risk management?
Okay, thanks, Sawun. I would say it's definitely helped. We've worked with a number of other consultants on various initiatives. And what we found with certainly the process that we undertook is certainly that it allowed us to first and foremost have a very structured way in communicating where we were in terms of strengthening our risk management processes. And certainly as we had different interventions across the institution, this assessment or this process that we undertook gave us a ready made starting point to communicate in a format that could be understood by the different consultants as to where the institution was. So certainly in as far as communicating, getting quite a lot of information in very easy to read formats, we found it extremely useful. And it was a really good starting point to develop a lot of the discussions and communicate very intelligently where we were and where we wanted to go.
Great, thanks. And I think my next question is something that has come in from our participant, and I want to kind of add to it for Hans. There's a question around kind of a profile of a microfinance institution, maybe a minimum requirement that is necessary before implementing the model. And really, if you could add to it in terms of, in your experience, what would you say are some of the success factors to implementing this well?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Well, there are really some important success factors. One is, of course, you have to really the MFI wants it. It is real, not forced by an investor or whatever. I mean, it's really willing to engage in integrated risk management. That is, of course, very, very key. So it is a tone at the top is very important. Then if you look at the preparation, it's very important to be well prepared when you start to do your assignment on site. So have a very well good communication to set the expectations right, to have the proper buy-in, like I mentioned. You have, as a consultant, to do quite a lot of desk study, to read the documentation. And you have to have a very clear set up front program and timelines that typically are really available for interviews, for example. So it needs the presence of 1 or 2 board members at least, members of key management, and relevant on other staff, which maybe are not a member of the management team. And first of all for the interviews, and later on for the workshops to be held. So it's all a matter of good planning and being good prepared and having the right people and thereby.
Okay, great. Anyone want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, just to add to what Hans said, and I think it's an important question because it's something that I get quite a bit in terms of a minimum requirement. Oftentimes institutions think that they're maybe not ready to start because they don't have A, B, or C in place, and from a technical perspective. And I think I would say from a requirement, I think what Hans said is spot on. We need the buy-in. Otherwise, the process really isn't going to be very fruitful. From a technical perspective, I think as long as we have buy-in, we don't necessarily need the whole process is a strategic process to build your capacity or to build an institution's capacity. So if institutions feel like maybe I don't live up to what the graduation model is asking, that's perfectly fine, and that's what this process was designed for. So if that's because I think the question came from someone within an institution, if that's what you're feeling like, well, maybe I'm not ready for this, or I think readiness for me is less of a technical readiness, because this is a strategic process. This isn't necessarily the next stage is actually building out our risk management framework internally, which is a very technical process. But this is really a strategic process. So as long as you have your board bought into this and some key people within senior management really wanting to make this happen, that's sort of the profile of the type of institution where you can engage with this and it'll be successful. I think Clive's example is very much along those lines. So just to kind of throw that out there, in terms of prerequisites, I think what Hans said is spot on. It's about having buy-in from internal stakeholders and what have you.
Excellent, and I think that's really all the time we have for the webinar today, as we're at the top of the hour already, and I'll just pass back to Valdete to conclude our webinar.
Thank you, Sound, and thanks to all the speakers and everyone who joined us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will send a link to the Microfinance Gateway site where you can access the recording and the PowerPoint slides within the next 2 days. In the meantime, I just wanted to make a quick correction. I posted the link to RIM's website where you could sign up for these resources, but the code that I posted was actually the code that we used for the first webinar, which are it's a different set of resources. So make sure, I'm going to post the correct code now. So when you go to subscribe on RIM's website, make sure that you put in the code RIM2 free 30. The previous code that I put there was did not have number 2 in there, so I apologize for that. And if you have already responded to the poll and said yes, that you would like to receive these resources, we will include that information, and Kevin is going to send an email from RIM as well with the details on how you can access them. Also, before I sign off, I wanted to ask everyone to complete a very brief survey, which allows us to obtain your feedback and improve future webinars. So please feel free to send us your comments. The survey will appear briefly on the poll. So I'm going to open it. So yes, you should be able to see it on the right-hand side now. So please feel free to complete it. And also, I would like to invite you to register for our upcoming webinars. And my colleague Mariana will put out the link to the upcoming webinars shortly. The next one will target microfinance institutions, and it's going to be held on May 17th. Finally, if you'd like to continue the conversation, I'm going to do 2 things. First, I'm going to leave this WebEx session open for a while. If you'd like to use the chat function and connect with your colleagues or peers, we've noticed that the WebEx platform offers us not just an opportunity to offer presentations, but oftentimes we've received feedback that participants engage with one another through chat, and it's a great networking tool as well. So I'm going to leave those sessions open for a while. We will be muted, and the speakers won't be around. But if you'd like to connect with someone, please feel free to do so. And then you can also continue the conversation beyond this webinar by joining the Microfinance Gateway Community LinkedIn group. Please feel free to join and post questions or connect with your colleagues or share resources. And we hope to see you there. We also hope that you'll be able to join us in our next webinar, or if you know of colleagues that would benefit from our next webinar, which focuses on microfinance institutions, please feel free to share the link so that they don't miss it. Again, thank you, everyone, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thanks, Kevin, Clive, Hans, and Sung.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.